Awakening experiences are usually calls to spiritual growth. For maybe a few minutes, maybe a few seconds, maybe a few hours, God gives us a glimpse of life in union with Him and all things. But we're not ready for unitive life. And so these experiences are overwhelming. They're sometimes scary. Sometimes, in fact, they're very, very uncomfortable. Because of this, some people are really relieved when these experiences end and their perception goes back to normal and they can just carry on with their everyday life. They just go, phew, glad that's over. Other people, however, respond to the invitation. They go, oh, what was that? I want more of that. And so they begin to investigate, and they begin to pursue a closer connection with the divine. And this is, I think, what the divine is after. A transpersonal psychologist named Michael Washburn has talked about God, or the divine, in terms of the dynamic ground. He says in his book, The Ego and the Dynamic Ground, that when we come into the world, our ego is not formed. And in fact, we are enmeshed in the dynamic ground. But that as we grow, in order to navigate the world, we have to create an ego barrier. We have to create a sense of separation between ourselves and Mother, say, ourselves and others, ourselves and God. We create an ego wall. Eventually, however, we're called to reintegrate with the dynamic ground. If we are not acquainted with the dynamic ground, that reintegration or brief reintegration experiences can be very, very scary indeed, because the dynamic ground is infinite and we are finite. It can bring up feelings of terror or vertigo or many other kinds of unpleasant experiences. But once we become acquainted with the dynamic ground, those experiences of contact are no longer scary. And in fact, we recognize the dynamic ground to be a loving presence rather than a frightening one. So these experiences that we've been talking about, these awakening experiences, are moments of reconnection with the dynamic ground. But because we are not acquainted with the dynamic ground, we experience these as frightening. We talk about these invitation experiences in a couple of ways, either as spiritual emergence or spiritual emergencies. People who have positive experiences of contact with the dynamic ground are having spiritual emergence experiences. That's my dog. People who are not acquainted with the dynamic ground and have violent or unpleasant experiences, we call those spiritual emergencies. So spiritual emergence or spiritual emergency. They're often the same experience. But it kind of depends upon a person's readiness for the experience, whether the experience is interpreted as blissful or intriguing or pleasurable or scary, frightening, very, very unpleasant indeed. According to a Jewish legend, there were 4 pious men who were experimenting with the early Jewish system of Merkaba mysticism. This is the predecessor to the later Kabbalistic system of mysticism that arose in the Middle Ages. Merkaba mysticism is concerned with triggering out-of-body experiences during which a spiritual pilgrim would behold the chariot and the palace of God and visit the various heavens, divining in the process the inner workings of the universe. So, during one of these spirit journeys, these 4 men each gained access to paradise. But they responded to this access in very, very different ways. One of them lost all desire to live in the world, and he died instantly. Another of the men beheld paradise and was so overcome that his mind snapped and he went stark raving mad. The third man beheld a great shining light in which he clearly saw not one God, but 2. And so he was exiled as a heretic. Only one man, Rabbi Akiva, entered into paradise safely and returned again with his mind intact. They all experienced the same thing. They all had a profound spiritual awakening, but they reacted to it in vastly different ways. So will the people that you serve. A similar thing may be happening in 2 people, but they respond in extremely different ways. And they'll do this because of many factors. Often because of the severity of the experience, but also because of the setting in which the experience happens. For instance, let's say I have an in-breaking unitive experience while I'm at home and comfortable. I'm likely, in that case, to have a spiritual emergence experience. I'll be welcoming of it because I'll feel safe. But let's say I'm driving when the experience happens, or I'm giving a speech in front of 500 people when the experience happens. I'm going to be a lot less open to the experience, and most likely I'm going to have a spiritual emergency. Our mindset and the setting that we're in is very, very important to how we receive the experience of awakening, the invitation experience. For some people, the experiences are just too scary. And in fact, they might feel better if they were hospitalized or medicated. And if they're and for some people that really is the best thing. Because if the experience is so scary that they can't appreciate or integrate what's happening, then seeking medical help is a good option. But if they're clued into the fact that there's something valuable that's happening here, and they can ride it out without medication, good things can happen. Also, even if I'm in a safe place, an experience, if it's mild, it might seem pleasant, but if the same phenomenon is intense, it could be scary. So as I say, these kinds of experiences can vary widely. And the kind of experiences that you will hear about are going to vary widely. Spiritual directors and psychologists that work in this field have written about the various manifestations of these awakenings or inbreakings. You'll note that I have a link to a reading list here. There's some very, very good books. I'm going to present a number of categories of awakening experiences now. And if you click on the handout, you can read along as I discuss them. These are culled, by the way, from Emma Bragdon's wonderful book, The Call of Spiritual Emergency, and an article by Stanislav Grof, Spiritual Emergency. First of all, the most common, I would say, are episodes of unitive consciousness. In this kind of experience, a person feels that there's a dissolving of his or her boundaries. A person might experience unity with another person, or with nature, or with the universe, or with the divine. Time and space might become irrelevant. Or a person could feel ecstatic. Or a person might feel frightened. So the dissolving of ego boundaries so that a person is becoming reacquainted with the dynamic ground, to use Washburn's term. This is one category. Another is an opening to archetypal energy or life myth. Grof calls this a return to the center. So a person might be struck by the fact that an archetype is being embodied in him or her, or that a myth is playing out in his or her life. In a mild form, this kind of phenomenon can be illuminating, it can be enlightening, it can be ecstatic. But in extreme cases, the archetype can take over a person. Likewise, a myth can invade a person's life and completely reorient it. In the grips of these kinds of experiences, a person might seem irrational, or might lose interest in hygiene or sleep, or might even have trouble getting out of bed. He or she might wander in the woods for hours or days, communing with God or with nature. Or they might be convinced that they're on a mission from God, or that they somehow must make the myth play out in their lives. One of the most common ways that we see this happen again and again is when people go to Jerusalem. This is something that psychologists in Israel report thousands of cases of a year, where people are taken over by the biblical stories and archetypes found in that place. It's hard to tell a difference between this kind of experience and psychosis. This kind of experience usually doesn't last longer than 40 days, although that can seem like an eternity. And in severe cases, it is probably good to seek psychiatric help. Certainly those who are experiencing the kinds of things that people do when they go to Jerusalem, it's best to seek psychological help. Another variety of awakening experience is the shamanic journey. Now, in a shamanic experience, a person might have an experience of going elsewhere. In native traditions, it's often thought that there's an upper world or a lower world, and a person might go to the lower world and experience a great kinship with nature or with the earth, might see or speak to spirit animals or disembodied forces. In the upper world, people might meet people who have passed on. Experiences of these types include themes of death and rebirth, sometimes experiences of being dismembered and put back together again. In native cultures, a shaman may intentionally go into this other world in order to gain medicine for the people. This isn't medicine as we think of medicine, not like an herb or a pill, but wisdom. In order to resolve some kind of crisis, whether it's a physical crisis like illness or a social crisis or a spiritual crisis. Spiritual emergence and spiritual emergency experiences can be seen as involuntary shamanic journeys. God or the universe sends you to get the medicine that you need, and some people have the presence of mind to collect it, and some don't. In native cultures, folks are very intentional about their spiritual journeys, but they can happen spontaneously to any of us at any time, too. Fortunately, they don't usually last more than a few hours. A fourth kind of awakening experience is a Kundalini awakening. Kundalini comes from Hindu tradition, and it refers to a powerful charge of energy through the body, often thought of as a divine energy. The problem, this is a very dramatic and a very real and a very dangerous kind of phenomenon, and it can actually do physical damage. Those who deal with Kundalini say that Kundalini energy sleeps coiled at the base of the spine, but as it awakens, a person can feel hot or cold or electricity or spasms and so on. It can be experienced as a barely discernible tingling or a raging fire, depending on its severity. And if it's embraced in a good environment, it can lead to a heightened spiritual sensitivity and awareness. It can last for minutes or hours or days or weeks. If it's really severe, though, it can very much disrupt a person's life. And if really severe, it can be crippling, not just spiritually, but emotionally and physically. It is unwise to do any kind of Kundalini work without somebody who is trained in the practice guiding you. I would never recommend it to a spiritual direction client of mine, unless a person is already on that path and has a seasoned guide behind him or her. Another kind of awakening experience that people sometimes talk about is a past life opening. This can evidence itself anywhere from a strong sense of deja vu to a vividly experienced flashback of a previous life. Often it happens in connection with another form of spiritual awakening, and this triggers the past life experience. And it can lead to profound insight, an awareness of patterns that a person has had in this life or perhaps previous lives, revelations, maybe just an inner knowingness or insight. And it might progress into a sense of being someone that you're not. An experience like this might be triggered by meditation or by a dream or even a daydream or being under the influence. You don't have to believe in reincarnation to have an experience like this. I'm not a believer in reincarnation myself, but I do believe that people have these experiences. I don't really understand what's happening when people have these experiences. I'm not sure anybody really does. I usually treat it like a dream. These are experiences that are coming to light, that have wisdom for the person having them. And so the goal then would be to mine the experience for insight, for patterns, for wisdom, for what the experience is trying to tell the person who is having it. It's not happening for nothing. These kinds of divine inbreakings are very purposeful. So I would treat it like a dream and try to figure out what it's saying. A sixth type of awakening experience is a psychic opening. This is an experience in which a person might see what is not normally visible, or might hear what's not normally audible, or feel what's not normally sensible. A person might see into the inner essence of a thing, or hear voices, or feel cold or hot sensations in ways that correspond meaningfully, especially to some kind of discernment that a person is making. So basically, we're talking about a heightened psychic ability. This is usually temporary, but people might discover a facility that they have during these episodes that alert them to abilities they didn't know they had. For some people, once the experience ends, they realize they have a talent that they couldn't access before. Kind of interesting. The seventh and final way that awakenings happen are possession states. Now, I know this sounds scary. We usually think of demon possession or some other evil spirit. Often, this isn't a spiritual state at all, but a psychological mechanism, wherein a psychologically wounded person becomes possessed by shadow material, things that we're trying to push out of consciousness, or sometimes a manifestation of the shadow material of people that are close to them. For instance, Emma Bragdon talks about a boy whose parents were very shut down and quiet. And so the boy became obsessed with violent sports in order to act out his parents' shadow material, the part of themselves that they had tamped down and denied, the passion and the aggression that they felt they must hide. Shadow material, things that we or those close to us have repressed, can leap out and take us over. Or sometimes it appears that it's actually another being that is taking over, such as in channeling experiences. Are those beings benevolent or malevolent? Well, all kinds of personalities come through when people are having those kinds of experiences. People have the full range of these kinds of experiences. Often during a possession interlude, a person might lose consciousness. And then after the experience passes, a person might feel a heightened sense of spiritual awareness or sensitivity. People who have weak ego boundaries are also much more likely to experience possession. Stan Grof adds a few more that can also fall into this category, such as near-death experiences and UFO encounters. When I say this category, I don't mean possession states, but I mean awakening experiences. Now, I know by this point your hair is probably standing on end and you're going, what have I stumbled into? What is this weird New Agey stuff that he's talking about? Well, it is weird. And certainly people who are into New Age spirituality trumpet a lot of these things as good things. But I'm not advocating them. I'm just saying people have these experiences. And when they have these experiences, it frightens them. They freak out. They don't know what to do about it. And they're going to come to you. And so if people haven't studied this, if they aren't prepared for the varieties of experiences that people can have when they're having a spiritual awakening, a spiritual emergence, or, God forbid, a spiritual emergency, well, they don't know what to do with them. So it seems good for us to talk about them here. I recommend the books on the list that you, on your own time, we won't have time during this class to go further into them, but I do recommend that you read them, that you become more familiar with these kinds of experiences so that when somebody comes to you and they're distressed, you don't get distressed yourself. You go, I know what's happening here. Or at least I think I know what's happening here. And can help this person discern what's happening and why and how to respond to it. So, how do we respond to it? What do we do when someone comes to us asking for help because they're having one of these extreme experiences? Please download the handout on how to help. Well, let's go through it together. First, normalize the experience. Most people don't understand what's happening to them, and they're just freaking out. If you're able to give them some clue of why they're going through what they're going through, it can be deeply comforting. It can help a person orient to what's happening to them. It can also help people stop fighting the experience and lean into it, trust it, rest in it, and that way learn from it. Second, ask the person what he or she needs. Does he or she want to see a doctor or her therapist or her minister? Does he or she just need to talk, or to be held, or to be fed, or to get to a safe place? Third, be supportive and accepting. Reassure the person going through this experience that what he or she is going through is temporary and that everything is going to be okay. Just hearing that from someone that they trust can help them relax. And relaxing can go a long way from turning a spiritual emergency into an experience of spiritual emergence. In other words, talk them down. It might help to tell them a story about your own spiritual emergence or your own spiritual emergency. Most of us have had them. Fourth, help him or her get grounded. One way to do this is by explaining how spiritual emergence or spiritual emergency happens, why it happens. Or help him or her connect to the earth or to his or her own body. They might need food. Hot, nourishing, heavy food is a good thing here. Or exercise. Both of these are grounding. Give him or her space to talk about the feelings that are coming up. If the environment that the person is in is too stimulating, get him or her to a quieter place, someplace peaceful. Massaging a person's shoulders or feet or hands might help a person reconnect with his or her body. 5, talk about his or her relationship with the divine. After all, this is what's going on. So there's no need to beat around the bush here. Address it directly. Pray with him or her if he or she is open to that. Talk through the insights that are coming up for him or her. 6, surrender to the process. Help him or her flow with what's happening rather than resisting it. Encourage him or her to relax into it, to explore it, even if it's strange or uncomfortable. This will reduce the panic substantially. And finally, if the experience is just too overwhelming, take him or her to the emergency room. Now, after this experience, or this kind of experience, a person might need a lot of help integrating it, unpacking it, understanding it, culling the insights and making important discernments about his or her life. And this is where a spiritual director or a pastoral minister can really excel. We might be the one person in his or her life that isn't going to think he or she is crazy. We might be the one person who has a clue what's going on and what to do about it. Moreover, helping a person realize what's happening, that this is an inbreaking of God. Sometimes it's a tap on the shoulder. Sometimes it's a whack upside the head. Sometimes it's even worse. But it's about God trying to get a person's attention in order to invite this person into a deeper and more intimate way of living with the divine.